do people have the power to change culturally determined gender relations? And in the light of the evidence that we know that there are strong linkages between culture and HIV/AIDS, how can we change these relationships? And the second question was, would changing these relations result in a reduction in vulnerability to HIV infections for women and the community at large? Because we also know that you reach one woman in the community, you begin to serve the whole community. Next slide, please. The other important question was also, can women play an important leadership role in this process of trying to change gender relationships? And lastly, who decides what an appropriate sexual behavior is? Is it the community itself? Is it us outsiders who go into the community and say, this is how we expect you to behave? So the overall program goal was for us to build community capacities to confront and address cultural practices and beliefs that increase vulnerability of women to HIV/AIDS. The key objectives, we wanted to increase community dialogue and awareness of the linkages between HIV/AIDS, gender, women's rights, and culture. Because we had done a baseline assessment in this same community. We had asked people about their understanding of culture and their understanding of HIV/AIDS. And there was a good understanding of the two, but not on the linkages. For example, when we asked people about their concerns about polygamy, none of their concerns had anything to do with HIV/AIDS. It was more of the other structural issues of women who fight, children who compete, and so on. And so we realized that people were not making the linkages between a particular practice and HIV/AIDS. We also wanted to strengthen the capacity of couples and families to address practices that put women at risk. Because again, the baseline demonstrated a lot of concerns around communication issues. And there were a lot of complaints from the men, and some of their excuses for seeking other partners, a lot of it had to do with communication about sexual issues. We also wanted to strengthen the capacity of community leaders and women in leading the transformative processes to address women's vulnerability to HIV/AIDS. So we were trying to use a combination of seeking leadership support, but also trying to seek for an opportunity to push women forward so that they could play an important role. And finally, to create a critical mass of culture change agents that would drive the change processes within their own communities. The process that the film was describing, it actually ends in a cycle where you start with the baseline, then you do round 1 of dialogues, round 2 of dialogues, round 3 of dialogues, and then you have the change agents, then you do your capacity building activities. And all the time, in your methodology, you should be speaking to the critical triple linkage between the HIV/AIDS, gender and culture, and women in the middle, as well as women's rights. And so we took women's rights and placed them right in the center, in the community, instead of pulling it out as a separate program. We did a lot around the dialogues. I'm sure the film did mention that, and you heard about the ballot boxes, the use of performing arts. But the thing, when we came to the change agents, I want us to just pull out for you some of the role that was played by critical women who were ordinary women. And I think if you remember in the movie, you saw this woman, Mrs. Sekete, how she was talking about how we used to deal with infertility. And I'll let Veronica talk a little bit more about the personality of this woman and how it eventually became a very important point in the change process itself.
Mrs. Sekete is one of the charismatic leaders in our community. She is not very educated, but she is very, very respected in our communities. And what she does is she goes from village to village selling paraffin for a living. She's a grandmother who is looking after some orphans who were left behind by her children who died of AIDS, some of them. And because she has a very powerful leadership, people believe in her. To start with, she was one of the, also the leadership who believed in these traditions, which is like everyone, every African, definitely they believe in these cultural practices until now, the age of HIV. And then she is the one who educates people that we used to do all these other cultures as a way of building our families. But now, because of HIV and AIDS, we should do it differently. As you know, that this program now is being called Changing the River's Flow. You don't stop the river from flowing, but at least you change it, the direction of the river, to achieve something. So Mrs. Sekete is also one of the, we did paralegal training. She cannot read and write, but she has memory like a computer. So she is also, at the moment, we managed that she worked her way up to sit in the chief's court, giving advice and also encouraging people to drop these cultural practices that affect women and children, especially in the era of HIV and AIDS.
And just the power of using her going into the village on a daily basis. She's not paid, she's not given anything, she's already in those villages on every single day selling her paraffin. And so we trained her to then go around sending the right messages, and it really made a huge difference.
Now, when we did the trainings, our methodology was like, so that we give women space, we started with women alone, the groups of women, so that we could, with them, identify the gaps, their needs, and how they feel that these needs and problems can be solved. And then later we had a group of men alone, and also later another group of custodians of culture, which this group included traditional healers, traditional leaders, the chiefs, the headmen, the church leaders, and also those charismatic leaders that are there in the community. Why we did this separately is because we wanted to give women voice, so that they could be able to speak without them being afraid of the men. Because in our African culture, women do not speak. It's like I'm doing now in front of men. They have that respect that has been built in them. So for them to really speak out and really bring out issues, it was impossible if we had to include men in that group. But in the first place, we had to sensitize the community leaders, to say, we are bringing this project where we would like to see how we can address the cultural practices that are fueling HIV and AIDS. Because they had experienced a lot of deaths and problems that had come with HIV when we started this community organization group, they agreed to say, yes, let's see how it goes. And then when we started our dialogues, it was women, men, and then these custodians of culture. And then later, we had to bring all the groups together and have a big community gathering where the dialogues were being documented to say, this is what came out of the women groups, and this came out of the men's groups, and this is what we got from the custodians of culture. Then they debated amongst themselves how they can solve these problems that are